I think it was in the mid-century, somebody said it. In the Middle Ages, somebody said it. It was a philosopher that said, all of man's problems start when he can't stay in a room by himself for 30 minutes or for a little bit without any distractions. Now, that has a whole other meaning in modern times because everything is a distraction these days. First of all, your phone is full of distractions that you constantly look at. And why do we go towards it? Usually, most people think we go towards it for entertainment, for fun, for passing time. But if you really go down to it, you find out that we go towards picking up our phone or even distract ourselves with people, unnecessary tasks, or doing all kinds of stuff that doesn't matter to us in the big picture scheme. And in fact, most of the time we look back and say, I've been distracted. And we kind of feel shameful towards it sometimes. Sometimes we regret it. Thank you for joining us here for this video. We've noticed that there are a certain percentage or a high percentage of our audience haven't subscribed to our channel. If you can please click on the button to subscribe to the channel. It will help us create more content. Which will help us reach more amazing people like you, to support them, serve them. So please click on the subscribe button, and I'll see you on the next video. Thank you. Bye. Hello, amazing leaders. I want to jump in and talk about avoiding regret. I love this topic for a couple of reasons. One, that most people, you hear all kinds of posts and speakers talking about this, that your biggest pain will be regret. But if you actually watch people in their day-to-day life, they will do everything in their power to avoid any discussion that gets them close to regret, close to understanding what they will regret more accurately. And usually regret happens when you're living out of sync with what truly matters to you in your core or in your soul. So here's how it shows up. And this is what tech companies, this is what news, this is what all these organizations bank on. Because as soon as, and I love this phrase, I think it was in the mid-century, somebody said it. In the Middle Ages, somebody said it. It was a philosopher that said, all of man's problems start when he can't stay in a room by himself for 30 minutes or for a little bit without any distractions. Now, that has a whole other meaning in modern times because everything is a distraction these days. First of all, your phone is full of distractions that you constantly look at. And why do we go towards it? Usually, most people think we go towards it for entertainment, for fun, for passing time. But if you really go down to it, you find out that we go towards picking up our phone or even distract ourselves with people, unnecessary tasks, or doing all kinds of stuff that doesn't matter to us in the big picture scheme. And in fact, most of the time we look back and say, I've been distracted. And we kind of feel shameful towards it sometimes. Sometimes we regret it. But the reason why we do that stuff is because there's a discomfort associated with just sitting with your thoughts and emotions. And usually, specifically with thoughts and emotions that scare you from the future, or it's some kind of guilt or shame towards the past, or it's something you feel uncomfortable or uneasy about. So what do? We distract with our mind. Sometimes that takes this is what makes people high performers as well. They will distract the hell out of themselves and they would get really focused on their work and avoid the thing to deal with. In the short term, that works, but long term, it piles on and affects them. So then let's go into what is the pain of regret and how can we avoid it and how does it show up in our life? And I'll break that down into a few things for you to think about. The first piece is what I just described is self. And self is an interesting concept because a lot of times when we look at self, we think our personality is ourselves. This is why people describe themselves as introverted, extroverted. I'm somebody who likes adventures. I'm somebody who does. We try to do our best to kind of explain who we are, what is ourself. But the reality is this. None of us know really who we are in our core. If you want to take the religious point of view, the core of us is our soul. It's not even the body. If you want to take take the more modern version of that, that's more digestible for people, is that it's your core, it's the deeper values that you have, it's how you show up in the world, and both of those are very indescribable. But a lot of times we associate self with our personality, and this is where things get muddled. And we also associate ourselves with culture. We say, well, culture could be I'm this person. I was born in this region. I'm American, or I'm Christian, or I'm Muslim, or Hindu, whatever. Your ethnicity and culture, religion starts to define how you behave. Now, combine the two sides, you say to yourself, I am this personality or this type of person, and then I was born within this culture and I was given this religion. That starts to define a lot of your behavior. And so a lot of what you do is related to that. And so either you feel guilty and feel shameful towards the things that is taught in that culture or within that religion or within that context, and you feel regretful towards that later on. And again, or you say that, well, I can't do that thing. And you keep saying that I'm not that type of person. Again, a personality model. So you have a personality model and culture/religious model that tells you how to be in the world. And here's what you will do. You will set up your whole life around those two sides and spend the next 5 years chasing a dream. And the dream is based on whatever the culture gives you. For example, the American dream. Nothing wrong with it, and I'll get to how you can navigate it differently because we all have to do it. Um, you so you start to chase the dream, the job, the corporate ladder, or even the business ladder, or even the investing path, and you'll say that, you know what, in 5 years I'll be free. And the interesting thing is, when I work with people individually on a group or in a group, they have rarely defined what freedom means to them tangibly. It's sort of a cluster of ideas of how their life should look like. For example, a lot of times they will say they want free time, but it's not defined how much free time. Would completely free time be great? Or would half your time free would be great? They haven't really defined it. In fact, a lot of times when somebody says, well, I want to create a life of freedom, like, okay, walk me through this. And I want to understand their vision of what that looks like. You find that there are a lot of incomplete pieces of it. This is why one of the first work that I get my clients to do is to go deeper into their vision and define it and become specific, and then pull their goals out of that. And in the process, they also become aware that a lot of how they thought about their future was based on that personality model of, this is just how I am, so that's how I will be, or culture and religion model of, this is how I should grow based on what I've been taught. And here's what makes matters worse. Their idea of personality, culture/religion doesn't come from them. It comes from other people. In fact, it comes from the interpretation that other people give them, whether it be their parents, teachers, peers, whoever has more credibility and expert. They all kind of tell you how to be in the world. And this is where the root cause of the problem is, that you're going to do this for the next 5 or 10 years, and you will almost certainly will end up with regret, because none of those, the self is not really you, it's a personality, and I'll talk about what a personality is. And the culture and religion is not really, wasn't created by you. And by the way, none of this means that you shouldn't pay attention to your personality or your culture or religion. There are really good things in all of those areas. So I'm not vilifying any of those. I'm just saying how people design their path forward inadvertently or subconsciously as they do this. Now, let's get to the core of it. The core of the self comes down to, self is an experience more than anything else. In fact, there was a spiritual teacher who would say that from the time, we all have mirrors these days, in ancient past we didn't have those, but from the time that you started looking at a mirror, or your parents pointed out that that's you and they're pointing to your body, we don't know what that is, but you've been looking at that mirror since childhood. And at some point you became aware and you became conscious. Oh, I'm looking at myself. In the beginning, whenever I'm showing my son who's 10 months old, he kind of smiles. I don't know if he actually knows who in the mirror is. Maybe he knows, maybe he doesn't. I don't know. But over time, as you become more aware, for example, my 6-year-old daughter knows that that's at least that's a representation of a rough representation of her, at least the way she visually appears. So What does that mean? That means that you kind of know yourself in relation to what you see in the mirror, and there are other mirrors too in your life. The other mirrors are, or the people around you. In fact, we describe people that way. There are mirrors in your relationship. Your parents tell you that you are a certain way, so you start to believe that. Your school, your teachers, your friends tell you, well, you're really good at that. You're really good with this, and all good feedback. Nothing wrong with it. Sometimes it's actually negative feedback when somebody's more critical of who you are. And that happens a lot, which gives us pain. But you start to accumulate this picture of self over time. Now, what is your true self? Well, you've known this from the beginning without even looking at the mirror. You know that you're an integrated part of everything. In fact, some philosophers even describe human beings, or even psychologists are describing human beings in the baby form, in the early childhood side, as having oceanic consciousness, which means that we might not know the difference between ourselves and others. We might think that we're part of an integrated self, which means that it's a lot like how your cells might think of you. If the cells are alive in your body, you have 50 something trillion cells. They the cells are an integrated part of everything. Like they're not, they don't look at a separation between themselves and others if they have any kind of consciousness. But in reality, they probably just feel as a part of a bigger thing. And in fact, this is the thing that religions at their core are trying to teach people, that we're all part of one thing. There's a unity, there's a union. They even put it in the context of God. There's only one God, one energy, or one energy that drives everything. And this has been around for thousands of years. We're beginning to understand with newer models and understanding of the quantum physics, of the cosmos, of energies behind things, that at a deeper level, we're all energy. Now, how you prove that, that's a whole other story. But so yourself, you've always known. The problem is that the culture, the religion, the language comes in and interferes and starts telling you who you are. And there are two forces that come in here. This is very important. The first force is the drive for authenticity, which is connected to the self that you've always known, that you are somebody who's here and you're an integrative part of everything. And then the drive for attachment. This is what makes you human. This is the human side. And the human side is very interesting because as human beings, we're a social species. We are an individual in some senses. We know ourselves, we're a part of everything, but we're also a social species, which means that we know ourselves in relation to other people. This is why the process of culture and religion is so complex and has such a powerful influence on people, because the way you look at your identity, in fact, you can't even describe yourself without saying I am a parent, I am a citizen, I am a son, I am a business owner. All these involve other people. You can't describe yourself without describing others in that identity. So it's very important to understand it has a huge influence on you. So then how do you avoid regret? And becomes very important. There are two things to understand. And this is what I've been kind of trying to allude to is, one, you need to understand what your idea of self is. What does that mean to you? And it's not about words. You can say that, well, myself is my soul, but what is that? That's just an idea. It's a word pointing to a signpost. And there's a phrase in Buddhism that says, Buddhism is the finger pointing to the moon. Don't mistaken the finger for the moon. Usually, when we point to when we talk about a word like self, it is pointing to something. So, what is the reality? In this case, it's not. Your body is a part of it. Your thinking process is a part of it. Your emotions are a part of it. But these are all parts. What you are in totality, you can only experience it, and words can only point to it. And those experiences tell you who you are in the process, or more accurately, the interpretation of those experiences for you as you become more conscious. So, what does that mean? That means that you need to step back from your culture, from your religion, and really look at it, because you came here. And my bias, my frame is that I don't think we're an accident. We came here uh, as part of a conscious design. How that was designed, I don't understand it, but as part of an intelligent system, we came here for a reason. As a species, and maybe even as individuals, at least I have experienced that in my life. That the things that have happened, whether the pain that I've gone through in the past, the challenges I had around addiction, around life, some suffering that I've gone through, some of the the painful things I've gone through, it wasn't for no reason. There was a reason behind it. Usually, I found that out in retrospect. In fact, the reason why I'm a coach is because of my past. So my past, I had to interpret my story a certain way. I had to interpret those experiences. In fact, most of the most profound things you're going to do is look at your experience and say, what does that mean, and what do I feel about it? And what do I want to carry in the future, which is the second part, which is the future self part. When you understand your past, your present, and your future, and you can kind of pull that out from the identity, the personality thing, pull it out of the culture, religion. None of this means you need to put down the ideas of personality, because we all have personalities. That's an aspect of who we are. We all have a culture. We all have a version of a religion. I'm not saying reject those. What I am saying is dissect out what you mean as a part of that, not because people have told you, but who you are. That means, have you taken the time to interpret all the things that you've gone through, or much of the things you've gone through, and where you've landed, which means your shame, your regret, your guilt, all the things that have happened in the past, along with the positive things. What have you gained out of it? What are you carrying consciously and subconsciously with you to the present? And what are you carrying to the future? And that future is very interesting now. And this is where there's this idea in psychology, probably one of the more powerful but very simple ideas in psychology, is that you have an ideal self and you have a current self. And there's a gap between the two, and that gap is what creates whether it creates growth depending on, or lack of growth depending on, whether you're going towards the ideal self from the current self or not. So for example, you might think that your ideal version of you, for example, in the Western culture, they might, I want to be more like Jesus. Well, how does Jesus operate? Jesus is more grounded. Jesus is more compassionate. Jesus cares about other people. Jesus cares about contribution into the community, and Jesus cares about salvation, those kind of things, or whatever culture you come from. But let's say in the Western world, it's that. So your ideal self might be a version of Jesus. I want to be more like Jesus. In fact, that's a phrase, that's a good question around that a lot of people ask is, what would Jesus do? And if they just asked that, it would be the most uncomfortable answer, because most of what people do is not what Jesus would do. And in fact, they have to make up all stories around what Jesus would do for them to justify what they're doing. So, but that's an example of your ideal self might be like that, and you can decide that it's within the context of your culture, or it might not be that. It might be like you have certain ideals that you've strived towards. You might be like, you know what? I've learned from my experience in my past, being more truthful is more important, because if you're not truthful, it can go towards all kinds of problems. Or I've learned in my past that if I'm explicit in my communication, or in the way that I deal with them, it avoids all kinds of problems in the future. So you've learned to have a value system around communication, to be direct and transparent. Or you've learned in relationships to stop being transactional in your relationship, or short-term seeking, because every time you've looked for short-term seeking or opportunistic ways, and everybody does it in some way, you realize that it wasn't worth it. So as you grow up, you realize these values, but the only way you realize them is because you looked back from that experience, you learned something. This is why a lot of people go through similar experiences. They don't learn anything because they don't look back in retrospect and understand what happened, what can I carry forward towards that future. And that future ideal self becomes the path to your potential. And this is where the realm of theory comes in. Here's my theory and hypothesis. And if we live in an intelligent universe, if there is a God, if there is a unifying force or energy, then it's designed so you learn from your experiences. This is why human beings have a powerful memory, so we can look back and understand. Now, most people look back and all they do is feel shame, guilt, regret. And I used to do the same thing, but when I started looking back and learn from that memory, whether it's my body memory through emotions or my mental memory, and experiences, and made sense of it. And a lot of times other mentors and coaches have taken me through that process. I put pieces together of my story, and I've started to realize that I can look back in my past in a very different way, not with guilt, not with shame, but with this sense of I've gone through a lot. Now, what can I carry with me to now? There's no point of regret and guilt. I can feel and process those, but I cannot live in the past. Now, what can I carry with myself to the present? Now, if you do that, if you can do that, then you can be content. But there's a missing element. If you don't look to the future towards an ideal version of you, then your mind will pull you towards fears. And your fears are usually connected to the future. What if I lose somebody? What if I don't spend time with somebody? What if I work too much? What if I don't work enough? These are all cultural ideas, by the way. But if you look towards the future, you see an ideal version of you, and you look, and that ideal version is shaped based on what you understand from your past and what you carry in the present. Then you strive towards a better version of you. You're consistently growing, and in that growth, you start to contribute positively in your environment, whether as a leader in a company or in your family or in the community you're a part of. And none of this means any of this process is easy. It's simple, but it's especially very complicated. In fact, I want you to think about it. When you think about the future version of you, how do you see yourself 5 years from now on? Can you picture yourself? Because if your mind will usually project and say you'll be the same person, but it doesn't make any sense because if you look back 5 years ago, you might be a completely different person if you've been on a growth path. I am even 6 months ago. So when I look to the future, I can't even imagine what that self would be, but I can at least imagine the next step for me. For example, I want to be much more expansive. In fact, that's one of the words that I've been repeating in myself. What does being expansive mean? This means I want to expand my perspective, expand how I contribute, expand how I learn the things around me. And to me, that means something. And that word just appeared a few years ago. It wasn't there from the beginning. And so I gave myself an intention, a word to be, and that's related to all the experiences I've learned and what I want to look towards. And aware has been part of me for a long time because when I didn't have awareness, I had a lot of suffering in my life. And the more awareness I have gained, the more suffering has been alleviated. I know how to deal with pain better. I know how to deal with challenges better. I can deal with regrets a lot better. If there are any regrets, I can frame them a lot better. So, and that's the trifecta that you need to think about is first, and as a summary, first you need to pull who you are out of the culture and religion and personality context, those models, and look at yourself and say, hey, what have my experiences, not other people's interpretation of me, but what have my experiences since as far back as I can remember have taught me, the good and the bad? And this is where it becomes very dicey because we might remember the good, but the bad, our mind shields us from it. It's painful to go back. It's uncomfortable to go back and look at some times that we regret in the past and really look at it and say, hey, yeah, I shouldn't have acted that way, but what did I learn from it? So a lot of people don't even look back because they it's too dark for them to go back towards it. And if you haven't done that work, it's very hard to go there. You will always distract yourself. And then out of all those past experiences, you come back to like, what have I learned personally, and then go back to the culture, religion, others. What are other people teaching me? And is there a difference between my interpretation and other people? And this is where the tension comes in because you want to be liked, you want to validate others, you want to be validated by others. If you start to think differently, it's very difficult. And this is why when people who grow, they tend to have a hard time initially with their environment because they start to think differently than others. And then the third piece is now you're aspiring towards a better version of yourself. You might not know what that potential is, but you might know the next step towards that. If you can envision that, even if you directionally go towards it, you will suffer less. But if you directionally go the opposite direction from what you want to become, you start to feel pain and you start to feel a sense of, I am not being who I want to be at my core. I'm not aligned. And this is where the question of alignment comes in. I'd love to hear from you guys. What was your biggest insight in that training? And we're gonna be carrying this forward in our Thursday session on the human drive for congruence or alignment. What will align you more to the highest version of yourself? And I've already kind of alluded to your past, present, and future, but what will take you to the next level? We're gonna go much deeper into it if you're part of my community, but if you're not, you're listening to this somewhere else on that I've posted. Please share what was your biggest insight and what are you taking away from this? Is your experience been similar or different? I'd love to hear from you. Until my next conversation, hope you have a great day. Bye.